Mr. McAllister, welcome. We are delighted to be joined by you despite your hectic agenda.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
Mr. Chair, if I am not mistaken, this plenary week, you presented your annual report on the common foreign and security policy on Tuesday, which was scheduled to be followed by a vote on Wednesday, namely today. So therefore, we would be pleased to get your distinguished take on this very important annual report. So if you allow, let me kick off with the following. In your report, you highlighted the importance for the EU to strengthen its strategic autonomy, which is an important element of the EU's global strategy for foreign and security policy. Yet, the ambiguity of the concept has already led to much confusion, not only here in Brussels, but also in many member states. Therefore, I would like to ask you, what is your definition of strategic autonomy and which responsibilities should be covered under this concept?
Instead of discussing theoretical concepts or even getting excited about certain wordings, if you call it strategic autonomy or European sovereignty, I would prefer to focus on concrete foreign and security objectives that the European Union now needs to focus on. And we are living in geopolitical turbulent times. We are all noticing how geopolitical structures are shifting. So for the European Union, this means at the core, working towards a stronger, more autonomous, more united, and more assertive foreign and security policy. And I have identified with my colleagues 3 essential fields of action in our annual report, which the European Parliament is about to adopt. Let me briefly mention them. The first one is the European Union needs to be a reliable partner worldwide. I would call it a preferred partner of choice for other countries. And to do so, the European Union simply needs to set priorities. We need to work together with our allies and defend international institutions and the multilateral system. The second goal, the European Union needs to unlock its potential, its political potential to think and act like a geopolitical power with meaningful impact while defending and promoting our principles and our rules. There is untapped potential in the common foreign and security policy, and we know that, and that's why we have also called for the External Action Service and the Commission to review the 2016 EU Global Strategy to reassess the learned lessons from the new geopolitical dynamics and also the current threats as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, a third observation, concrete steps need to be taken to strengthen our common foreign and security policy as a European Union, because this means strengthening our global influence. We need to form alliances with like-minded partners, and we need a quicker and more effective decision-making process.
Mr. McAllister, referring to being a geopolitical power, you are known to support the idea of a European Security Council to help Europe act more strategically, yet there are some concerns that such a council could sideline or even replace the EU's Foreign Affairs Council and potentially undermine ambitions to establish the EU as a key foreign and security policy player. May I ask you, what is your take on such concerns?
As I just mentioned, we need a quicker and more effective decision-making process on foreign affairs. That's why I am in favor of moving from unanimity to qualified majority voting, at least in selected areas of the common foreign and security policy, also to consider additional formats to improve our external actions, such as a European Security Council. Now, what is this European Security Council about? The German government has made proposals, the French side has made proposals. At the beginning, let me say, the justified concerns of all member states must be taken into account and considered seriously. But I do believe that a European Security Council can contribute to greater flexibility and improved responsiveness of our external action by reducing the pressure created by the need to achieve a consensus among all the member states. Now, as you rightly point out, many questions still exist, such as the institutional setup, possible members, possible powers of Security Council, but this needs to be discussed with the best interests of all 27 members at heart. And that's why I would welcome the chance to discuss this kind of issue and have an open dialogue about these fundamental questions and potential policy reforms at the conference on the future of Europe, hopefully which will start this year, jointly organised by the European Parliament, the Council and the Commission. And in the meantime, the European Union must make use of existing foreign policy instruments more effectively and fully implement the provisions of the Lisbon Treaty.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair, referring to the insistence, I would say, in your report on adopting and implementing a targeted human rights sanction mechanism, may I ask you, why has this not been done before, given the fact that the EU is based on a strong commitment to promote and protect human rights?
Well, that is a very good question, and you will know that the European Parliament has called for establishing this kind of sanctions mechanism for many, many years. Well, finally, the member states have agreed. There now exists an EU human rights sanction mechanism which allows for targeted sanctions such as asset freezes and travel bans against individuals and organizations that have a complicit role in serious human rights violations. I have always been in favor of this because I believe it is important for us to advance our shared foreign policy goals in the European Union on the one hand, but also, as you mentioned correctly, to defend our values in a unified manner. This human rights sanctions mechanism was initially met with resistance from some member states. Nonetheless, it is extremely important that in December, the foreign ministers finally adopted the legislative framework for the new sanctions in form of a council regulation and decision. The final point here, we now have this mechanism, but now we should actually make use of it when and where necessary.
Mr. McAllister, since such a human rights sanction mechanism without a qualified majority provision would not mean much, your call on the member states to move from unanimity for a qualified majority voting in foreign affairs has been very much appreciated by many. However, some critical voices that you just mentioned in your answer here and there do not believe that this would mend the critical divisions among the EU member states that affect the unity of the Union. And in that respect, what is your opinion on such concerns and opinions?
Well, I am aware that such a significant change in the procedures cannot happen overnight. And this needs to be approached with the utmost respect for the positions of all member states on this topic, which includes smaller countries and which includes countries, for instance, that are, when it comes to military issues, neutral. This is why I am calling for going step by step. I am calling now to move to qualified majority voting only in some selected areas of foreign affairs, such as human rights sanctions we were just discussing. Now, the European treaties already give us this option. Article 31 of the TEU is clear. It states that the European Council may unanimously adopt the decision allowing the Council to act by a qualified majority in selected matters of our common foreign and security policy. But this is also the problem well described. To introduce qualified majority voting, first of all, requires a unanimous decision, and we're not there yet. But I still believe that the European Parliament should continue to call for becoming more effective in our decision-making process. I'll just give you one example. All EU member states, all 27, agreed that we should sanction the Lukashenko regime in Belarus. But in the end, because in this case, one member state was putting the issues of sanctions against Lukashenko and his regime and combining this with the question of sanctioning another country, in this case Turkey, they were mixing these two things up. And this meant in the end that for weeks we couldn't adopt sanctions, even though all 27 countries, including the one country which was dropping out, actually agreed. And this for me was a typical example where unanimity in the end can lead to a blockade.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Mr. Chair, as you called for a stronger transatlantic partnership in dealing with the current foreign and security challenges that Europe and the US are facing globally, what do you expect in this regard from the upcoming Biden administration?
Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States, and I wish him wholeheartedly all the best. That he succeeds in uniting his country to build bridges in a deeply polarized society. This will be a huge and really difficult task to overcome the divisions in the country. For us in the European Union, Joe Biden is a president that we will be able to cooperate with better. He signals trust, he signals reliability, and he signals predictability. And I am certain that the transatlantic relations will get a fresh impetus, respectively. It already has. And things can only get better because since 2017, since Mr. Trump took office, our relationship underwent a stress test like never seen before. Of course, we shouldn't forget that some obstacles will remain in transatlantic relations. The geopolitical attention in Washington is further shifting from Europe to the Asia-Pacific region. But on the other hand, the transatlantic cooperation is unique in the world. With no other country outside Europe, apart from Canada, do we have such close cultural, economic, and political ties. And the two main pillars of our transatlantic cooperation have always been trade on the one hand and security and defense on the other hand. The European Council, the European Parliament, and the European Commission have made concrete proposals where we want to cooperate more closely with the US administration, especially in fighting the pandemic, in working on the economic recovery, trade, digital technologies, and of course, security and defense, or the fight against climate change. But the most important thing is that we are welcoming the United States back to the Western world, back to Europe, to international organizations and institutions, back to the multilateral order of our world. And if Mr. Biden wants to form an alliance of democracies, many of us in Europe will welcome this. In Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Korea, in Japan, in India, in the European Union, but also outside the EU, like in Norway or the United Kingdom. What we have in common with the United States are we are democracies, we respect the rule of law, and we want to have a free and fair global order coined by multilateral structures.
Mr. McAllister, thank you so much for this fruitful exchange, and thank you so much for dedicating your precious time for this interview.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.